What is going on today, guys? Quick video. I want to talk about lever actions as defensive tools. Now, this is something I've talked about in the past. In fact, I think I even have a video from 2 or 3 years ago that talks about this, but I want to kind of keep this topic fresh because I personally feel that the lever action is something that is far too often and unjustly overlooked as a good defensive tool. Whether you're talking about something for home defense or maybe you're a prepper, you're talking about something that might be a good kind of quote-unquote bug-out gun. I think there are a lot of merits to this, a lot of pros that you might want to think about that depending on your situation and what you're looking for a defensive firearm for, this might actually be a really good option for you. So first up, let's talk about if you live in a restrictive state. This is, for all intents and purposes, ban-proof, right? And especially if you live in a state, whether it's California, New York, or some of the other ones out there, that maybe puts more fees on, let's say, owning a handgun, and you want something you can keep around your home, well, something like this is looked at as basically just a hunting rifle. So a lot of times, these can be cheaper to have, cheaper to own, and easier to access than something like even a handgun, much less if you're looking to pick something up like an AR and AK in a restrictive state that is either going to be very, very cost prohibitive or possibly just really hard to find in an out-of-the-box configuration that's legal for you to own. So obviously in a restrictive state, something like this could be a really, really good option. Now, again, talking about people just look at this as a hunting rifle, keep in mind, this was not designed to be a hunting rifle. Lever action rifles were designed to be the quote-unquote combat rifles of their day. That's what they were designed to be. They've kind of evolved into hunting rifles simply because our technology has moved on and we've got ARs and AKs now. But this is still an effective defensive tool if you use it properly. Okay. Another thing I want to talk about is availability and price. These things have been manufactured for a very long time by companies like Winchester and Marlin and Mossberg, and more recently companies like Rossi. They were manufactured for other corporations, for department stores, for places like Sears and J.C. Penney's, and Montgomery Ward used to sell these things under names like Westernfield and J.C. Higgins and a few others out there. So there's a ton of these between the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and even into the 90s that were manufactured that you can find pretty easily out there on the used market for in that $300 to $400 price range. I see them all the time here locally. I see them online all the time. So a lot of good availability, and if you're on a budget, this could be something that fits well for you, especially when comparing it to something like a new Glock that's going to cost you $500 to $550, or an AR or an AK or whatever it is. If price is an issue, this might be something to look at. Not to mention, maybe you even have somebody in your family that owns one of these. I mean, these are one of the most common rifles in this country, period, and has been for decades now. So it might even be easier to pick up than you actually realize. Another thing just to throw out there, and maybe this falls in line more with if you're looking for a bug-out gun, but this is a very inconspicuous gun to tote around. If you're not toting around a handgun, and you got to have something that's a little bit larger, this is much less conspicuous than an AR or an AK or a lot of the more modern long guns out there. So that's maybe something to keep in mind as well, depending on what your particular use is for something like that. And another thing I want to talk about is the size and weight, because I hear a lot of people say, well, these are big and heavy, and they're comparing to things like ARs and AKs that weigh in around 7 pounds, give or take, depending on how much stuff you hang off your AR. They can weigh 7 to 8 to 9 pounds, but people talk about, well, not a lot of capacity for something this big and heavy. So let's actually weigh this and take a look at how much something like this weighs. And obviously, if you were setting this up for defense, it would weigh less because you wouldn't have a scope on there. You'd either use iron sights or you would use a red dot. But this one, fully loaded, weighs in at 9.4 ounces. Pretty heavy, but still under 10 pounds, right? Well, let's compare it to something else that a lot of people like to use as a defensive tool. Something like this. A fully loaded shotgun with a 20-inch barrel and an extended magazine tube so that it holds extra rounds. This weighs in at 9.8 pounds. So when it comes to size and weight, because these are basically the same size, weight, this one actually weighs a little bit more. They both hold the same amount of ammunition. Both take side saddles to carry extra ammunition. Why would this be something a lot of people would consider, but not this? So that's something to keep in mind. If you would consider something like a fully loaded shotgun, why not go ahead and consider something like this, which could also serve as a great hunting rifle as well. Another thing I want to throw out there real quick is just, if this is just too much for you, you don't like 30-30, maybe the ammo's too expensive, or you don't like that it doesn't have a lot of capacity, or this is still just too big and too heavy, there's always something like this. Smaller carbine lever actions, pistol caliber lever actions. This one's in 357 and 38 special, depending on which caliber you load it up with, 9 to 11 rounds, and even at 38 special, 11 rounds of 38 special coming out of an 18-inch barrel will do a lot of damage. Okay, you could take a deer at 50 yards easily, probably further than that with something like this. This weighs 2 pounds less than either one of these. Granted, in the walnut and stainless configuration, this particular Rossi costs about 500 bucks, but you can find used Rossis that are not set up like this, or used Marlins, used Mossbergs that are set up in pistol calibers that are very, very affordable, still in that $300 to $400 price range. So if this is still too much for you, something like this might just work really well for you, and it still checks all those other boxes that we already talked about. So all in all, guys, I just want to keep it out there. Lever actions are good defensive tools, especially given what your particular situation is. Please don't overlook them. Give them a chance because they are really great rifles.